read in the portion in the Torah on Shabbat, the section known as Shoftim, Judges. And begins by saying, Shoftim v'shoftim titen lecha b'kol she'arecha, that you should put judges and also those who execute the decisions of the courts in all of your cities, and they shall judge the people. And concealed here, but mentioned in other sections of the Torah, there is something which is known as the 4 types of death penalties that were executed by the courts. And the Zohar this week delves into these 4 aspects of the death penalty. So one might assume that the Torah sanctions the death penalty because it mentions very specifically on particular crimes that the punishment will either be through the burning of the individual, sreifa, horrible death, but nevertheless that's what's mentioned, and by hanging and by the sword. And the 4th one is by stoning. Now, civilized people like we assume we are, find this very repulsive. The idea that one would have to suffer the pains of death very slowly, because if we're, in fact, modern day society makes every attempt to seek out if the death penalty has been approved, the easiest method by which the perpetrator of a particular crime should be put to death. And certainly these four aspects of the death penalty in no way indicates that the particular death penalty will be executed in a manner that one can assume will be a quick and painless death. Neither of these 4 seem to indicate anything but painless. Another aspect which is connected with this week's reading is the idea of when the nation of Israel is called to battle. In section 20, verse 2, verse 1, it says, when you will go out to battle over your enemies, you should not fear, because just as God took you out of Egypt in a painless way, therefore he will be present. And the verse number 2 continues, and when you will be close to the battle, the high priest, or some say it may be just a priest, shall speak to the nation, and he should say unto them, Shema Yisrael, listen, O Israel, Atem kerevim hayom lamilchama alavechem, you are shortly approaching the moment when you shall do battle unto your enemies. Al yerach lebavchem, do not have any faint of heart. Al tiru, do not fear. Val tachbezu, val ta'atsu mipnehem. Another another word for, and we know the Torah does not have superfluous words, just for the sake of filling up a book, and therefore using more adjectives, but all indicating that you need not fear from your enemies. All of this indicates to us that the Torah is full of violence, and one would be under the impression somehow, if this document should have been so structured as to lead us to believe that violence should not be part of our lives. Because once you begin to rationalize violence, the justification, the validation of violence, where does it end? Who's going to validate? Who's going to decide, even if they be the judges? What happens if they make a mistake? Could it happen? Of course it can happen. What happens in the case of, also mentioned immediately following the idea of establishing the judicial system, it then says that one should, the courts should not put to death or judge, and this is in section 17, al pishnayim edim o shlosha edim yumat hamet, and that when it comes to the case of putting to death, in this case, uskaltem bavanim vametu, when the death penalty is of the nature of stoning with stones, this decree should only be carried out through two witnesses that appear before the judges, or two witnesses, or three witnesses. Yumat hamet, shall the person condemned, this is the way it is interpreted, yumat hamet, the person who is going to be condemned, that is the only way you can condemn somebody. Lo yumat al pi edechad. And if there is just one witness concerning the death penalty, in the case of the death penalty, no individual can be put to death through one witness. And it goes on to complete this section. And the witnesses must be the first to participate in, let's say, in this case of which the Torah is referring to, they must be the first to throw the first stone, since it was through their testimony that this individual has brought a death penalty upon himself. Therefore, the witnesses must be the first. And then come the rest of the people who will participate in the stoning. Now, what is this kind of a... Well, there were activities like this. We know in past history that some would run the gauntlet, and they would be either beaten with clubs or beaten with stones. I mean, human beings have this, it appears, this very intimate internal nature of enjoying the sight of bloodshed. I don't believe that the world would be so involved in bloodshed as to feel that bloodshed is something that is so abhorring and we would not want to participate in wars, etc. While we, again, validate bloodshed by virtue of our own judgmental ideas of what is considered to be the enemy and who is to be considered the enemy, what is to be considered the enemy of mankind. And this is what it appears to be the reading of this week's Torah. And it's, of course, very appropriate inasmuch as we see today at the beginning of what I consider personally when I say personally, I don't mean it's based on research that I've done, and therefore I believe we're into the final period of cleansing, but that nations are beginning to, and I say nations because this is not merely a case of Serbia and Bosnia, but rather this is now taking place in almost every nation in Europe. For those of you who have visited Europe lately, will hear the idea of ethnic cleansing. Ethnic cleansing means just what the Torah is telling us. In fact, the final three words of this section concerning death penalties, judgments, courts, etc., it says, "V'yata harami kibeka." You should remove all forms of evil from your midst. Same idea. It's a form of cleansing. It says very clear, "Uvialta" means, in fact, cleansing. Biur chametz, the cleansing of the chametz just before Pesach. And so this section here seems to be revolting, and it should be for those who have this feeling of that bloodshed, inhumane treatment of others is something that should not belong to mankind, should not be in the preserve of mankind. And yet then there is another strange Talmud, which states that as long as the courts were in session, meaning when there were Jewish courts during the time of the temple, etc., the death penalty was never meted out. Can you imagine? The Jews must have been perfect individuals. That the death penalty was never decreed. Final death penalty. Meaning, there may have been death penalties, but ultimately, the condemned individual never was put to death. Never was put to death, because also in this section of Shoftim, it goes into a discourse, the Zohar, a little more on the idea that these witnesses that are brought for their testimony in the condemnation of this individual were put under strict and very minute scrutiny to see if indeed they were not testifying in a false way, or indeed they did actually see what they claimed they saw, and through their testimony, the death penalty was finally determined by the courts. And because the scrutiny was of such a nature, says the Torah, says the Talmud, and it goes into a very long discourse in Sanhedrin, which is the tractate dealing with these matters, dealing matters of courts, etc. Sanhedrin means the court. That after having fully complied with all of the requirements in the determination of whether the witnesses were qualified, and whether the witnesses were indeed describing exactly what took place, at the end it came out that there was never an execution of the death penalty. Well, is it by chance that during that period of the temple there was no death penalty? And yet the Torah seems to indicate the four different methods of death. How do we reconcile the two or three? How to reconcile the idea of the enemy in this Parsha, also the enemy of Israel. Who determines who the enemy is? Is it always God that comes down and says this is the enemy? And therefore, these people should be totally wiped out, as it also is described in the Torah. And I mentioned on many occasions that many years ago in this I guess, brought this idea to appear so realistic to me concerning the Torah. When I had a friend who said that when he was interested in a murder story, he would pick up the Bible. It's the most thrilling of all murder stories that you can find in any imagination of some author. The plots and so on, because the Bible is full of incidents of murder, justification of murder, validation of murder. And how do we reconcile it? Well, if we look at this week's Zohar, there's a long and difficult discourse on the aspects of these four types or versions of the death penalty. I've discussed this on other occasions, but each time I guess there's something else we can add to what the Zohar has to say. And from what emerges from the Zohar is something entirely different. Something entirely different. And of course we are, those of us who are involved in the study of Kabbalah, already have come to the conclusion, like the Zohar himself, like Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, that essentially the Torah is not a recording of history nor a compendium of rules, laws that pertain to the individual. In other words, thou shalt do this, thou shalt not do that, etc., the prohibitions, the positive commandments, etc., but rather the Torah is describing the nature of the universe, and our participation and our purpose in the scheme of the universe. And that since there are laws and principles that have been established since day 1 to day 7, specific laws and principles, which again were established only for the purpose to provide mankind with his objective in being here, being born in the first place. Why are we here? Which has always been the century-old question of why are we here? What is the purpose? To be born, have some problems, I shouldn't say some, I guess, have our life go through a series of problems, an endless series of problems, and throwing us in a little bone of joy here and there, and then leaving the world as if we never had entered this place in the first, from the very beginning. And we know that we do have a reason why we are here, and the reason is very simple: the removal of bread of shame. All of us have come down here for a purpose of restriction in whatever area it may be. But why was the world set up in the nature that it has been set up, meaning the celestial bodies and the solar systems and everything else out there together with mankind, is to provide the setting, the scenery, by which we can fulfill our tikkun. But we must know the ground rules, we must know the nature of things before we can deal with. I mean, if someone wants to be an artist, he doesn't learn that there is a pencil, or there is a paintbrush, or there's a canvas on which you write or which you paint, then of course he's out of touch with painting. He's got to know the rules. It requires, if you want to be an artist, and paint with paint or oils, there are rules. There are rules in every behavior, in every undertaking. And we have an undertaking. That undertaking is to eliminate the bread of shame aspect. That was the primary cause for our coming into this world of existence. Says the Zohar, and this of course is a revelation, but it coincides with the Talmud, that when we discuss the four aspects of condemnation of death, depending on the crime, it is not referring to. In fact, it does not discuss the particular crime that was committed, because the death penalty, as opposed to our understanding of the death penalty, is a death penalty that is brought upon us by our actions. And the Zohar has a name of the executioner. And that executioner is not the physical courts. Not the physical courts. Now, what do we need the physical courts for? Why go through the procedure of having a court, judges, witnesses, etc.? Says the Zohar, what appears in our world, the worlds of physical courts, judges, etc., is merely the movie of what took place on a metaphysical, unseen level of existence. That if someone committed one of the crimes stated in the Torah, one of those crimes, and it says wipe it out, if those crimes, and this has been determined up there, and subsequently is determined down here, but the Talmud, as well as the Zohar, wants to make it so clear that when someone commits a crime against the universal structure, and that is what we essentially do when we commit one of the crimes that are stated in the Torah. And if we do not have the support and assistance of the Zohar, then we leave it to scientists who are always in the dark and who always attribute this particular crime and that particular crime to, that particular illness, that particular sickness to the cause of this, that, and the other thing. And we might safely say that in 100% of the cases, their evidence is always inconclusive. But they measure by the amount, the type of people who are dying from a particular illness, and therefore they group these people together and come to some conclusion. Of course, the conclusion is never conclusive because it does not apply to all peoples, but only because it seems to fit a pattern that they associate a particular illness. Today, when you have plagues, like the Black Plague, today the AIDS plague, which is getting worse. The only reason I say it's getting worse is because they were under the impression that it was the symptom of the HIV factor that created the AIDS virus, and now they see that there is the AIDS virus without the HIV. I mean, they're really in a dilemma, and only today is it becoming so clear that what they have already determined is worthless. It does not lead us to any conclusive conclusions. Even when they claim that homosexuality is a cause for AIDS, that has been proposed. This might be the reason. Why do they assume that's the reason? Why is that assumed as the reason? Well, because the majority, at the present time, the majority of cases in which AIDS is determined, which where the immune system is broken down, takes place basically with people involved in homosexuality. This is not the way to conclude, or this is not the way to determine the relationship, because they're really only guessing. Why do I say they're only guessing? Because they're taking the physical facts and putting together, as they always do, the probabilities. The probabilities. But then again, what about those who are not homosexuals? What about those who it has been determined contracted this particular disease, and I stress this disease because it is man's plague for the present and almost to the end. Because for us it's another lesson entirely, and that's what the Zohar is discussing in this week's portion, that the homosexuality, if that is against the structure of the universe, and it is, how do I know? Because when the Torah, contrary to the Catholicism and Islam, where they have said, it says so in the Torah, most Jews say it says so, the principle of the Torah, and we assume, and we have always assumed for 2,000 years, that the Torah is a compendium of laws, how a religion was created. And yet we know, and we have learned in the classes, that the Torah is not a book comprised of laws of religion. And this I find to be the most difficult consciousness to remove. I always say you could take it's like they say you could take people, you could take Israelis out of Israel, but you can't take the Israeli nature out of the Israel. The same thing here. Somehow Jews have left religion, you see. They've been taken out of religion, but you can't take the religion out of the Jew. What do I mean by that? And I think it's so essential because that's what we're really talking about. I come to Los Angeles and I hear some people joining the fashion show at Sinai Temple. Sinai Temple is the same as the center here. Right? Everyone has the freedom to express themselves in religion as they want to. But how can, after someone learning and studying here and feeling that there's something more, getting energy, not just religion, but you're getting energy, you're getting a support system, hopefully not hopefully, but that's what the Zohar says this whole game is all about, is to provide us with a textbook on how to prevent things from happening and what Rosh Hashanah is about. It's not a holiday of religion, of the Jewish religion, celebration of a new year. You've all learned that is total corruption. So people who are totally opposed to religion, as per se, yet comes Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, well, there, it's part of the society. If you belong in that society, you go to the Sinai Temple, or you go to another place. You don't come to the center for Rosh Hashanah. I mean, those are the most three, Rosh Hashanah, 2 days, and Yom Kippur, the three most important high holidays. They call it high holidays. I mean, there are low holidays and there are high holidays. This is all a form of corruption. It's all a form of corruption. And therefore I am not quiet on this subject, because I know as much as the Jew does not want to be associated with his religion, he somehow can never divorce himself from the aspect of the religion to indicate to us how strong Satan is. To indicate how strong Satan. If someone asks me if he wants to go to Sinai Temple, or he prefers golf, or he loves golf, I would recommend he go play golf. I would not even recommend he come to the center, because he doesn't have any idea of what this is all about. But someone who has grasped somewhat of what the center is trying to teach, what Rabbi Ashtok started, that was the revolution. the revolution that there is no Jewish religion. Can't take it out of the mentality of the Jew. Can't take it. He may have abandoned religion, but religion didn't abandon him. And he still clings to these few nonsensical ideas, because what the Torah is teaching us when it deals with Rosh Hashanah or when it deals with homosexuality, it's the same idea. The structure of the universe. We must be in harmony with the structure of the universe. It's not a question. Is it against religion? Not against religion. So we have a gay synagogue in New York. What's wrong? Nothing wrong. They want to have a synagogue in it because it's religion. Why do they want the synagogue? Why do they need the synagogue? I ask myself. But I'd be the last one to say, it's wrong. Whatever anyone believes is right. But that doesn't change. It doesn't change the nature of the universe. It doesn't change the nature of the universe. You can't change the nature of the universe. Therefore, because it cannot be changed, and because it has been created for us to prepare the scenery by which we can accomplish and reach the ultimate goal of removal of bread of shame, the Torah has only described, never telling us what we must do, only describes for us the nature of the universe. Therefore, when it comes back to the idea of the death penalty by stoning, cruel, says the Zohar, we're not discussing the stoning of an individual. It would be a cruel treatment to permit this human being, this irrespective of the crime that was committed, to be born and to have to suffer a painful death, because certainly he is not going to die unless it's an accurate sportsman and he knows how to throw a stone and somehow put this person to death immediately. I mean, that certainly there's no laws concerning how the stoning should take place. These were novices. These were people maybe who never threw a football in their life or a baseball in their life. These two witnesses begin the process. Were they sportsmen? I mean, these are all questions we must ask. It sounds ridiculous, because it is ridiculous. It is ridiculous to even consider that's what the Torah wants to teach us. But when it comes to this section, we don't discuss it, because you could drive away all the members of your congregation if you start telling them that there's such a thing as stoning. And in our day and age, the liberalism and the idea of freedom and so on, and against violence, except that there isn't a community in the world that is not involved in violence. And all we see the Torah discuss here is violence, especially in this section. And then we need the Kohen to come out and assure us that when we go out to battle, to slay every man, woman, and child at times, the Kohen says, don't worry. And you need the Kohen to assure us. And why is the Kohen coming out? To assure the Jews do not have, fear of heart. And now that he said what he said, all the fear disappears, because he says, it's like a psychiatrist. You go to a psychiatrist, he says, listen, this is what you got to do. You got to remove that phobia. Yeah, I know that. I didn't come here for you to tell me that I got to remove it. Tell me, how do you remove it? Well, after 30 years, maybe he may be successful. How to remove it? Because it has nothing to do with phobias. But we give a determination without knowing accurately what we're referring to, without knowing actually what we are dealing with. Here we are not dealing with the physical aspect of stoning. The physical aspect of stoning, in fact, comes in many forms. As you probably have learned here, and maybe Ruthie discussed that, would be the caving of a building, So someone is buried under the rubble, or someone dies that way. Someone drowns. Someone chokes on a piece of food. I think, well, it's in the tapes anyway. This is not even what we're discussing here. That's only an indication to comply with what, or to reconcile the Talmud that the death penalty was never carried out by the courts. So, how did this person die that kind of, and particular death, violent death, is because he or she did not conform with the principles, the natural laws and principles of the universe. When you do not conform with the principles, this is the subsequent result. This is the subsequent result. Homosexuality is the result of the breakdown of an immune system. Because what is the immune system? What is the immune system? Well, it means it's that something that fights. Fights who? The disease. Who's the disease? Who is the disease? I mean, who's the disease? Did you ever ask yourself, who is that disease? It's a force. Who is it? What is it? A disease. We have a word. Well, I don't know why they didn't call it candy. Well, maybe candy would sound like it's a good thing. No, so if you like candy, you wouldn't want to call it. You call it dis-ease. Dis-ease means there's no ease. Dis-ease. But call it something more terrible than that. And the Zohar says, the force of every illness is these two forces, called Sam. We don't say out the full name of it. Sam and Nachash. There's a male and female counterpart. A force that exists. That exists. This is the culprit. This is the culprit. And what happens in the case of stoning is that this force, the force associated with Satan, it's the force of Satan, but Satan again is not the force of evil. It is not the force of creating death, chas v'shalom, in an individual. Satan, he's the mastermind of our life. He's our alter ego. Talk about the alter guy in our mind. In fact, he is, if we define it clearly, he is the 3-4% consciousness, unfortunately, which prevails to the extent that he has influenced us. That the 3 or 4% is the rational consciousness, which is the only thing that we should consider, the rational consciousness. Therefore, we're all so brilliant. We say, look, I'm a skeptic. I'm not sure. With what aren't you sure? With the 3 or 4% that we're familiar with, the 3 or 4% consciousness which we operate day in and day out, that is determining for us, that is concluding for us, making for us decisions, etc. That is called Satan consciousness. He sets us up. He sets us up. He's the leader of the pack. Satan is the leader of the pack. And what is Satan? Only consciousness. Nothing more. We apply Satan to many other things. But what is Satan? Essentially, the consciousness. The consciousness that is also part of us. Now, when he sets the game, and he's setting down the rules of the game, when he makes his penetration, when he influences us to the extent that we consider his consciousness to be in our lives, in our personal lives, the predominant consciousness, then he brings in the forces known as Sam, and the snake. These two combine, These two combine to execute the death penalty. The death penalty, whatever that penalty is, these two execute it. The judge, who is the judge? Who is the judge? There is no judge. Up there is no judge. Oh, God judges us. God sits in judgment, we say. And God puts out the decree. Unfortunately, that again is one of the very serious corruptions that have set into what is called Judaism or the Jewish religion. That if God can sit in judgment, then we are relating a concept that should have been foreign to God. The concept of judgment. The concept of decreeing a death penalty. Now, if God is all good, how can you relate the concept of death to God? In fact, we have been studying of recent that there is an Eitz HaChaim and there is an Eitz HaDat. Eitz HaChaim and an Eitz HaDat. There's two parallel universes. One is called Eitz HaChaim. No death there, no illness, no troubles, no chaos, no devastation. It's another reality. And as long as we connect with that reality, everything is wonderful. That's the domain of God. The domain of what we observe more times than none is the world of Eitz HaDat, the world of good and evil. That is not the domain of God. He is not connected with that place. Because if he is all good, how can he associate with a death penalty? So what does it mean he sits in judgment? What do you mean he sits in judgment? It does say so. He sits on the throne of judgment. What he does, and that is all that he does, is he sets up, and he did set up in the first 7 days of creation, the natural laws and principles of the universe. One of those principles is when you put your finger in a socket, you get a shock. God does not pass judgment on the individual. He's just not in tune with the natural laws and principles of electrical energy. So is the entire universe. Whatever the prohibition that is contained in the Torah states, and its death penalty, merely indicating to us how we are out of whack with a particular law and principle of the universe. Without going into each particular aspect, which is so beautiful, and why it is in conflict with the natural laws and principles. And nobody can change those laws and principles of the universe. Try. Let's not take the celestial region. Take this region. Change that law without using rubber gloves, etc. Change the law when you put your finger into a socket. You don't get a shock. No such thing. There are many other physical laws. Jump up or jump off a building. There's a physical law. You don't fly up, you fly down. Change it. Change it. Has it ever been changed? Never. And it never will be changed. In fact, why should it be changed? If it hadn't been changed for so many centuries, why should it be changed now? So we assume, on past experience, present experience, that we cannot alter the principles of the universe. That what's all of this death penalty is around. The Zohar goes on to a long discourse, and this is the revelation of the Zohar. That what happens if I have indeed conducted myself in some activity which is contrary to the laws and principles of the universe. The natural effects, the natural results are the four principles of death. What does that mean? God comes down and stones you, or two witnesses come down and stone you? No. What it says here, the hands of the witnesses shall be there first to put this man to death, not referring that they're going to throw the first stone, because it was never decreed. But if in a court, and the court always made certain that the judgment would not be ruled, then what's the scenario about? Did the rabbis know in advance that there would never be the execution of the death penalty? Sure they did. When did they know it? When did they know it? They knew it when it said, "Thou shalt not kill." It says clearly, "Thou shalt not kill." Oh, you mean when it's justified? What happens if two witnesses came and they testified falsely, as the cases have been, and the Torah discusses that? Now you condemn the man to death wrongly. How can the Torah structure itself that mistakes of that nature can occur? If this document is foolproof, why do I say it might be foolproof? We say it was written by God. Do you think God would write something that is not foolproof? What this Parsha is talking about, and that's the energy that we hope to achieve, is that if I have committed that time when we had the courts was create the scenario that each individual who had committed a crime became aware of what his crime was. For what purpose? For what purpose? So that he would be ostracized in public. After all, it never was concluded. The courts always would find something that was not conclusive. This is what the Talmud says. That was not conclusive in the evidence that was presented in the courts. Because there were 7 strict and stringent requirements for these witnesses, for their total testimony to be accepted, to such an extent that it was never accepted. Now, why the scenario? Why did they sit down and say that they would come to the conclusion of this death penalty when there should be no death penalty? Because man cannot, being now guided by the principle, that even means a judge. We're not talking about the one who was elected, maybe even by fraudulent methods. We're talking about the judge that was appointed in the time of the temple, when there was a Kohen who could see through every individual, who could determine, like Moses, who was taught the 7 aspects of how to read people, how to see their internal structure, to know if they are honest or dishonest. They could read these people. These were the judges we had. But what the courts did was provide this individual, this supposedly condemned man, with an opportunity to know that, look, you see, we have come to the conclusion that you had committed this particular crime. And this is the death penalty. Now, the reason why we are sitting here is to give you the opportunity, and if you learn the Zohar, what we are going to learn is how I can overturn that individual personal death penalty that I inflicted on myself, whether someone saw or didn't saw. The reason there were courts was only to provide mankind with the opportunity to understand what his death penalty was and how to deal with it, to the extent that he could remove the death penalty. You mean that's what this is all about? Yes. What this is all about is to teach us that when we have committed a crime, that crime includes eating chazir. But there's no death penalty. There'll be another aspect of how I went against the laws and principles of the universe. Nothing more. And no one's here to be judgmental, not even these courts, but rather to indicate to the individual what he has to fear, what judgment has already been placed upon him, and that if it was the stoning, as you learned, then he would wind up in an old building that crumpled and collapsed, and he was buried alive, or he was put to death by stoning, or choking on a piece of food, etc. How do you avoid that? Can you overturn the verdict of the crime that I committed towards the whole of humanity? Because when I go against the laws and principles of the universe, I've created an atmosphere as small or as large, as impressionable or otherwise, on the whole of the universe. On the whole of the universe. And we're all affected. We're all affected. But nobody ever, according to the Zohar, will ever be condemned unless he participated in a crime. But take this poor young woman who went to the dentist who had AIDS, right? Contracted the disease. She was not even a lesbian. There was no crime against a woman being a lesbian, incidentally. The crime against the natural laws and principles of the universe is homosexuality. It's a crime against the structure of the universe. So says the Torah. Someone interested in learning how it is a crime against the universe. Not something that we say is abhorring because, civilization hasn't accepted that mode of living. Who's talking about mode of living? If you want to be a hippie, it's not a mode of living, not the natural mode of living. You want to wear your hair in a ponytail. I mean, who tells you not to? But not everybody is wearing that. This is not what we're talking about. This is the corruption of society, which has placed its own rules on how to live. One of those rules are that in the event of what you consider to be someone being a dictatorship, you can go out and wage war. It almost conforms with the principles of the Torah. Kill your enemy, man, woman, and child. Says the Zohar. Violence can never be perpetrated by an individual, even the courts. Even the courts that were established, like our present-day courts, that through a jury of 10 people or 12 people, a man is condemned to death. Even in those days, when we had the kind of judges, and it was never through a jury, incidentally. Why? Because the jury selection, if you get your note in the mail, you've been selected. They need people on the jury, so you're selected. Who are you? Maybe you have prejudices. So they sit down, they try, and if you're smart enough to avoid the prejudices, can those two lawyers read you who you are? Oh, in the Torah. Through the Zohar today, these people were given instructions on how to read people, to understand whether these people could act as judges and therefore not provide what they consider to be their judgment, but rather to act as a channel. Therefore it was 70 plus the 2 scribes, 72, and the number 72 already means something to you. 72 is not just a loose number. There were 70 judges in death cases, 70 judges, and the 2 scribes. What do you need the 2 scribes? They're counted also. Because we know when you have 72, you have the totality, I should say, of all the fragmented energy forces of the universe combined into one unified whole. Therefore, when they would listen and they proclaimed this man should be put to death, what they were already indicating, listen, we weren't present, we don't know, but we're telling you that there is a crime that you committed that went against the natural tendency, natural laws of the universe, and this is going to be the judgment. Because they could render judgment. I use the word judgment because I'm also caught up into it. No. What they rendered for this individual was what he has to deal with. If he wants to reverse it, this was not just an enjoyment of condemning people. On the contrary, how can we avoid death? We've spoken about Shavuot. You want to attend. You want to guarantee yourself life. Come to Shavuot, to the centers. Unfortunately, only centers of the center are the ones that follow the principles that were laid down for what purpose? To avoid death. Torah is not coming or indicating to us, death penalties, bloodshed, and so on, to remove it. It was never part, and it was never the intention of the Bible to give us the requirements or provide us with the rules and principles of what happens on this level. No. On what happens on that level when we perform acts which are contrary to the natural laws and principles. And now that this person is aware of what his death penalty is, he's now prepared for a death penalty. How will it happen? Choking in a building, etc. However, the result of his negative activity comes about, now he will deal with it particularly. And we'll deal with one section. Deal with one section called stoning. And what emerges from the Zohar. Now we don't know whether I'm supposed to be condemned by some negative activity, what my death penalty is. Therefore, you learn the laws and principles of the universe, which is what the Torah is about. And then you say, well, I did this, I committed this crime against the natural laws and principles. This is the death penalty. I have to do it myself today, unfortunately. At one time, we had the benefit of courts who provided us with the clear indication of what the death penalty would be. Not that they ever meted it out, because it's contrary to the basic principle of the 10 laws. Thou shalt not kill. Meaning, who was that addressed to? To people with a corporeal, physical body. For what reason? How do I prevent it? How do I overturn? Now, who causes the crumbling of a building? Who causes cancer? Who causes it? What's the element there? Says the Zohar. It's the force of Sam and his entourage. They have to be dealt with. And therefore, if you deal with them, how can you destroy them? How do you overturn them? How do you remove their clutches, their internal clutch on your body? That's what the Torah is talking about. That comes into a whole new concept of what the Torah is trying to indicate to us. So when we talk about going to Sinai Temple on Rosh Hashanah, go ahead. Nobody, everyone has a free will. I would personally recommend, if you're going to Sinai Temple, and I'm not averse to Sinai Temple, I think it's a wonderful place to go. They've got a lot of social activities there, and you can meet a lot of nice people. And I don't mean it in a facetious way. Some people there, I don't mean it that way. I really don't. But I'm saying, but if you're talking about removing a death penalty, then you don't go to Sinai Temple. You might be better off going to play golf. And I would personally recommend that. At least get some enjoyment, rather than a boring Rosh Hashanah, how long it is. Even with attempts to, cut out, maybe most of the service. No, I'm not averse to that. I'm not opposed to that. But what we're discussing here is life and death. And as the Zohar says and the Talmud says, if you're sure personally, by the way, that you have not committed a crime against the laws and principles of the universe, you don't have to attend Rosh Hashanah services. There's no purpose. There's no purpose because there is no religion. The reason for going on Rosh Hashanah, says the Zohar, is to remove the cause of death. That's Sam. How do I remove his clutches? His impact on me. How do I remove it? How do I get rid of him? Can I get rid of him after there has been a decree? Not a supernal decree. Again, leave that word out. Supernal decree. After I have condemned myself by a particular activity, which this particular activity, because of its violence towards the spectrum of the entire universe, this is what it is. How do I remove it? This is what Rosh Hashanah is about, and this is what the Torah is trying to teach us when it speaks about death penalties. When it says that the Kohen says, as we quoted before, when they were going out to battle, do not feel weak. What did that mean? What did it mean? Don't feel weak. In other words, you call down the high priest. You imagine the corruption to even assume this. You call down the high priest, and he's standing now before the troops, and he's going to tell the troops, now look, when you raise that sword, if you're reading it literally, when you raise that sword, then you might have a second thought. Hey, wait a second. I'm opposed to bloodshed. Like conscientious objectors. You ever hear about those people? They're opposed to going to fight for their own country. Why? Because they do not feel that they can become involved in bloodshed. It's against their internal character. Now we need the Kohen. I'm reading, and I haven't added one word to the, nor interpreted it other than what it literally means. That the Kohen now gets up before the troops. Says, you go in there with a full heart, a full deck. Do not waver. Murder. Kill. Because it has been decreed these people should be annihilated. And we need the Kohen to give us a pep talk. Which is what it says. It sounds like I'm really making fun. I am. I'm doing only what Rabbi Shimon said. How to treat the Torah. He says you're an imbecile, an idiot, if you treat the Torah on a superficial level, treating the stories as they are written. He said that. Why did he make that? He saw the dangers of religion. Imagine, I'm telling you, I could never understand it myself. It was a joke, but people would go on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur to the synagogue and have nothing to do with any part of Jewish religion. This they went. I would ask myself, why are they going? I could never understand it. Why are they really going? I said, because we've been so programmed into the idea of religion that it's hard to let go. Even if he was completely taken out of religion, doesn't observe no dietary laws, no Shabbat, no none of the holidays, none of the principles, still goes on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Who created that scenery? Satan. Totally Satan. To convince us that you don't want to let go of religion. After all, there's somewhere they say about a Torah, and they say the Torah mentions Rosh Hashanah, mentions Yom Kippur, cling to it. Why? This is the difficulty. Therefore, we have lost over the period of 2,000 years what these judges were doing. What this chapter is talking about. Shoftim, judges. Who are they? Who are these people? What right? Who gave them the right? Who gives the judge the right to say, you are guilty, and therefore I will reserve decision until May 25th, 2-3 weeks, and he wants to think about, who is he to determine how long a person should be incarcerated? Who is he? He knows the law. Does he know? Does he know the law to the extent of how this decree or how this judgment will take effect upon this individual? I mean, does he go through all these things? No. And the truth of the matter is, he has no right. He has no right. Even God doesn't have that right. Then what is all this about? All these punishments. On the contrary, because in our negative activity, we have brought upon ourselves death penalties, failure in business, failure in health, not death necessarily, because there are variations of how we pay for the crime that we committed. Variations. But even the death penalty, says the Zohar, even the death penalty, the Torah, the internal aspect called the Kabbalah, teaches us how you can remove the clutches that already Sam has placed upon us. After Satan does his number on us, then in walks his fleet of Sam and his friends and does the job of AIDS, cancer, whatever. Who is it? Who is it? It is Sam. And that's what the Zohar is talking about in this week's Bible. How do I get rid of him? You get rid of him, you have no disease. You get rid of him, you have no disease. Because every disease is a force. What is that force? No medical researcher can answer that question. None. None. Even a hurricane. A hurricane. How does a hurricane begin? Why does it begin? How does it begin? And even MIT, which has done the most extensive research into have answered very simply. 3 words. 4 words. We do not know. Can you imagine? After years and expenditures of money, they don't know. Ask a doctor. How? What? When? Doesn't know. Only when what he can observe is what he deals with. That is not what the Torah is talking about. If we can remove our consciousness, and this is, I find, the most difficult thing. Now, just to give you an example, we'll take Ladum B'Skila. The judgment of Skila. Who are we here? But it says stone. But I don't know if you caught this when I read it. It says through 2 witnesses or 3 witnesses. Why it say 2 and 3? There's a long discourse on that. I mean, if 2 is enough, why do we have to know that 3? Of course, if 2 is sufficient, then of course 3 is sufficient. Why does that have to say 3? We'll leave that alone. Yumatamet. The death person should die. Did you notice when I read it? You asked yourself, I mean, he's already dead. You're talking about stoning a dead person. Yumatamet. You should put to death the dead person. How do you put to death a dead person? So ask the Zohar. How do you put to death? But that's what it says literally. Put to death a dead person. Says the Zohar, Ladum B'Skila. You know who we're talking about the death penalty? Not even talking about the person who is, because of his negative activity, is going to be put to death by stoning. Talking about Lissam. Don't say out his name. The name has a tremendous power. It's an angel. It's a force. Like all angels. Force. It's Sam. Ladum B'Skila Lissam. Torah's not even talking about. Here, it's not even talking about the person who was condemned to death. The person condemned to death, there's judges. I mean, there's laws and principles. Those laws and principles have already been described. In fact, it does not discuss the crime. Another aspect. It's talking about that if someone is to be stoned, okay, for something that he did, well, what did he do that warrants the death penalty by stoning? Here the Torah doesn't even talk about it. Yes, in other sections it does, but not here. Says the Zohar, because we are not discussing the stoning of an individual. What we are discussing here is how to a coded word on how we can stone Sam, the one who's going to cause the entering of a person into a building that is going to collapse. Or someone threw something and accidentally hit this person in the head, and he died of a brain concussion, whatever happened, hit by a bat, hit by a mugger, whatever the situation. He slipped on a banana peel, hit the pavement, hit the wrong section of his head, and he died. Same thing. Slipped on a banana peel. The entire idea here is how to remove Sam. In other words, if we do not enter, as of this morning, if we do not enter into a new consciousness, that when we discuss disease, we are no longer talking about disease, something there. The cells run rampant. A force that makes the cells run rampant in cancer. Who is it? If you do not begin by saying, I know who he is, again, there's nothing you could do. Go to your doctor, go to the surgeon, Chas v'sholom, and he'll do what he thinks he's got to do. And therefore the whole industry is in turmoil because they don't know what they're doing. In fact, only recently, I heard this from a friend who is a true researcher working at one of the top universities in the United States. And he said, we discussed many things, he's confidential. He says, I want you to know confidentially what we believe. Everyone says, today, people live longer. When they find out a person has cancer, lives longer than he did before. Isn't that a great medical achievement? They live longer. You hear so many incidents of whether it's chemo, whether it's radiation, but they live longer. He says the whole thing is a joke. Not only a joke, but it's a fraud. Why? What we are doing today, let's say, before we had all these detection devices, that's what we needed the courts for. So we would know what they don't know. Before we had all these detection devices, you see, a person who had cancer at age 40 didn't know it. And he lived until age 60, right? Age 60, he died. But we didn't know. Then we opened them up, we found the cancer in there. Right? Now, biopsies and so on and so on. Today, he says, what happens? We find out at age 43, and we treat it, right? And he lives another 7 years. Whereas when he died at age 60, before we knew he had cancer, you see, we didn't know. And so he died right away. He dies the same time. Whether we know it or we don't know. This was such a revelation to me. So simple. Listen to his explanation. Say a top researcher in cancer. What he tells me. Well, these are fraud. And they convince us. Medical achievement. They don't know what the force is. Here we're learning the force. What's the force? If you think it's something that they have defined as cancer, that's the culprit. It's not the culprit. The culprit is always Sam. The moment he had been given an opening to enter, he enters in, and his job, Satan's job, is to convince us to go to Sinai Temple at Rosh Hashanah. You understand? That's good for us, so he can bring in his fleet. Who's Satan's fleet? Sam. He is the man that does the job, not Satan. So, just to clarify, sometimes we use Satan, sometimes we use these different names for angels of death and so on. No, Satan prepares the scenario. He's the one who convinces us about how right we are and how successful we are and how healthy we are, until we are no longer healthy, until we are no longer successful. But he leads us down that road of self-confidence. He leads us down that road. Once he captures us, then in comes Sam with his fleet. Now, stoning is with a stone. The stone is Yud. I'm just reading for you the Zohar. And when it says something about they have to throw the stone, right? V'zorek ota ela b'chamesh etzba'ot shehen hei. What throws the stone? I mean, isn't it talking about the witnesses are going to throw the stone? They are going to stone him. Well, how do you stone him? You take the stone in your hand, right? You're taking the literal story, but with another interpretation. It has nothing to do with the stone. It has to do with the force of the 5 fingers that are now holding on to this stone. That is the first hay of the Tetragrammaton. That's what the Torah is talking about. Can you imagine? The Zohar is taking a story about stoning and says that the stoning is only to indicate to us the Tetragrammaton. Look how far-fetched this is. I mean, how does a Tetragrammaton come into an event of stoning? Because it has nothing to do with stones. It's another coded way of telling us how we're going to stone the Met. We're not talking about stoning an individual. The Zohar is making, and it's clearly indicated, because it says the dead man shall be put to death. That's what it says. Why does it say the dead man shall be put to death? He's already dead, so says the Zohar. Who's talking about the dead man? We are talking about the force of death. The force of death. How do you put the force of death to death? That makes sense. Not cutting him away, not removing him when you haven't removed that force of death. And therefore it says, stoning, to tell us it incorporates what? By code. The stone is the Yud, because that is the instrument itself, which we understand. The Yud is the power of the Tetragrammaton. The next 3 is how it's executed. Remember, the stone is nothing. The stone is by and within itself nothing, just a force. If I put a sperm or a seed on the table, what happens? If I return 1,000 years later, everything remains the same. They are not taken from a potential energy force and placed into an actual force. So the Yud always represents the force. The Hay is represented by the 5 fingers. Ubekaneh Hazroa, with the arm, is the Vav. The Vav. It's a code. Throwing the last hay just is the katef, the shoulder. Does the shoulder participate? Yeah. That means the final hay. I mean, this either for some of you may be even more confusing. Not confusing at all. When the Torah is talking about stoning, now it's only indicating to us, and this is one of the most crucial Zohars, in fact, probably the most important Zohar, into eliminating the idea that the Torah is teaching us a bunch of laws. The Torah is teaching us some stories and tales. And the Torah is teaching us a religion, that at Rosh Hashanah, you go to Sinai Temple, you understand? Because that's where you get to play golf in maybe a little better. And the whole Torah that spoke about Rosh Hashanah wasn't even talking about going to the temple. Nothing to do with it. Therefore, I feel in good conscience. If someone is bored going to the temple on Rosh Hashanah, I say, go play whatever you want to enjoy. Because he didn't understand what Rosh Hashanah was about. It was to put to death, as the Zohar says here. He describes each and every single method. It's very lengthy. It requires, and maybe one day we'll just open up a course just on this section, very difficult section, on how we put to death. But if we do not begin to understand, number one, what the Zohar taught us, that the Torah is not a bunch of laws and telling you about a holiday called Rosh Hashanah. Number two, that the Torah is totally and completely concealed in its teachings, to the extent that we're talking about a stone, we're talking about the Tetragrammaton. This is so far-fetched. Where in the stone do we see the force which must be brought into position? The Tetragrammaton is the only method by which we can remove death from us. That means, as the Zohar says, how many years we have to go, that has been predetermined. But as the Talmud says, unfortunately, most people die before the time even allotted to them. That's the problem. Because of various conflicts with the natural laws and principles of the universe. What the Torah came down for, the only reason is Dr. Spock's book. You know, he wrote a book on how to deal with babies. This whole book, the whole book, is how to deal with the results of our negativity and how we can remove it. Nothing more. Nothing more. Nothing less and nothing more. How do we remove death, which we inflict upon ourselves? Stone. This is the connection. והמחשבה זורקת את האבן אליו. שהיא שם המפורש. How do I throw this stone now at him? Without a consciousness? Forget. The consciousness must be that I am thrusting at him the power of Yud Kei Vav Kei. Without the power of Yud Kei Vav Kei, you cannot remove anything. No matter how many times they slice up the individual, and now they're giving him a few extra years of life. Don't believe it. Don't believe it. Don't believe it. He would absolutely, and they of course can disagree, and they have a right to disagree with me, but they cannot disprove what I say. That had they not performed that operation, he would have lived the same amount of years. Because if you don't remove Sam, you have to remove the culprit. The culprit is not that piece of flesh that they have removed. That's not the culprit. The culprit is Sam. And so, from today on, we're going to begin thinking of how, in our own lives, learning this section, which we are going to start soon, on how we can remove the illness. Because ultimately, we can't depend on the medical profession. Imagine a $164 billion medical bill. I mean, what used to be a $2 billion bill is now $164. Look at all the advancements. Forget about corruption. I'm just talking the mentality. We have no alternative, and that's the age of Aquarius. Little by little. I mean, I just look around, just to share with you, I just give a look around the world, which I am familiar. I live in a plane practically. I can tell you that the The whole world, including Georgia. Georgia. You ever heard of Georgia and Russia? There's a civil war there. They even know about Kabbalah. And maybe Kabbalah can help. In other areas where there is wars, bloodshed. Only 20 years ago, nobody knew. I didn't know. 30 years ago, I never heard the word Kabbalah. Imagine. I went through everything. Never heard the word Kabbalah. Never heard the word. Zohar. Yeah, but it never rang a bell. Just another book. You know how many books we have in the yeshiva that I learned? Thousands. There was another book, but of course we never touched that book because it was too difficult to understand. Now, the whole world. I say the whole world, literally. Literally. Why? Why? Because this is the way we are going to bring the end of death. He's not coming through God's intercession, because he never becomes involved. He never infiltrates. He never intimidates us, because he's not involved. He permits free will all the way down the line. He cannot be involved if there is free will, and we believe there is free will. Then he cannot be involved, and he is not involved. He's a producer that puts all the parts together. But this section, and the reading, of course, this Shabbat, this section, the whole section, if we haven't got time, so I would leave you, like I left you, but I didn't leave you. Come Shabbat, you will reap that benefit. Why? Because you know it's in your consciousness when we read it, that this is the method. The Kohen, when the Kohen wasn't giving these people a pep talk, what was he doing, the Kohen? What was he doing? Don't be weak. What do you mean weak? You mean he should hold that sword when he shoves it into someone's heart? He should be done with the full strength, as the verse indicates. Is that what the Torah states? No. He's telling you, do not lose consciousness, because you are not going into battle. We are not dealing with these. If these people are evil, they are not going to be put to death by the sword. If they are evil, it's the evil in them that must be eliminated, not the person. The same way as we are studying here this morning, the method by which we can remove what? What a surgeon does? What Serbia says? How do you cleanse? By eliminating the physical people. The surgeon says the same thing. He eliminates the physical aspect of cancer. That's not what we're learning here. The Kohen wanted to tell them, remain with that consciousness, because Satan is going to come along and give you 1,000 different causes and reasons, of which are inconclusive, which will never assist you in removing Sam, who is the primary source, the only source of all ill in this world. Satan's job is what? And that was the Kohen, to keep their consciousness. That's all he wanted. Not that how when they penetrate that spirit, they never penetrated. They never killed anybody. Never killed anybody. What they were out to battle was, as he said, the last one, the machshava. Without the machshava, forget it, without the consciousness. He was raising their consciousness, the Kohen. That when you go out to battle, remember, you're not going out to kill this person because he doesn't agree with what you believe in, because he has another language. That justification, even on the basis of religion, the holy war, is justified. This is not what the Torah ever indicated. Because if you believe that, if you believe in this Torah as it is written, then you have no right. You have no right to condemn an Iranian, the fundamentalist, as to why they are embarking on the jihad, the holy war. They're only doing it, you mean, because they're Muslim and I'm Jewish and it's directed against me? You mean, but when I direct it against them, it's okay? And the justification is it says so in the Torah? The answer is no. Never was this pasuk that when the Kohen comes out and says, be strong, kill with all your might, was never the intention, says the Zohar. It was never the intention. Because bloodshed on that level of the level that we live in, the corporeal level, is never justified. Never. And yes, it's Hashem. We'll embark on a new consciousness, like we do on Shavuot. We remove death for 4 months at least. Maybe it's a year. Now, when it comes to Rosh Hashanah, we're going to remove any of the aspects where the courts, the upper courts, not the courts down here, upper courts have already prepared a judgment, and we want to remove it. And this is what the Zohar is talking about. Shofar is one of the ways we do it. The Tetragrammaton, fully described in the Zohar. What a wonderful zechut that we have. The merit that we have that previous generations did not have. Amen. Amen.